This is part 4 of the review, the final instalment of this. It's been great to have Chris and Ben, and they're still with me for the 4th part. They've not ran off, we've not bored them to death, so that's good.
We've been here since August.
Yeah, we have. I want to start this part with, we spoke about the Ipswich game, sadly for you, I suppose. But let's go on to that Preston game, because it was sort of, if you take this back end of the season, it's been the one minor fault in a really positive sort of 2019 for Norwich.
We had Paul Lambert and then Alex Neil in the same week. One of them was going to beat us.
Yes,
I think we all knew that.
And I think if Norwich fans had to pick one.
I think that's it, yeah. And actually, it was just an aberration in the first half, really. First 15-20 minutes, Norwich didn't start very well. Found themselves a couple of goals behind, missed a penalty, and actually in the second half they laid siege to the Preston goal and could very easily have got something out of that game. So I think, again, with hindsight, you just accept that one. But at the time, you're always worried about the next game and how quickly can they bounce back from that. But I think if you'd said to Daniel Farker after that game, look, you can play anyone you like in the Championship next, he probably would have said, Bolton, please. Absolutely. And that's what they got. So it was a good chance to bounce back immediately.
If there's one major fault to this Norwich City team, it's penalties. They scored 1 this season out of, what, 5, 6?
I'd take that.
Yeah.
One major fault. And Ben Marshall missed one on loan.
Yes, he did. Yeah. So I don't know what it is with Norwich and penalties, but not great. But that was another example of them. Do you think that game was the rocket they needed, in the sense that perhaps after that Leeds game they'd hit the heights? This one had sort of brought them down a little bit, and it was a case of, actually, if we're not on top of our game, we're going to get beaten.
Yeah, I think, though, to Chris's point, there's just enough viable signs that you're now not going to go on a losing run. You create a load of chances. I think one of their goals was a volley smashed off the bar, fall straight to their goal and stick it in. You look for viable signs, and I repeat the same thing over and again. If you create a lot of chances and don't concede many, and you're not going to win every game, but there's just enough viable signs and evidence over literally months now for me to see Norwich lose at Preston, look at the stats and think, okay, Bolton next, they'll probably win.
You literally cannot win them all. But you look at I mentioned this earlier, the 2 away defeats that Norwich had in the league this season, which I still think is extraordinary.
Incredible run.
Having watched Norwich away from home over the years and often travelled more in hope than expectation, to see them lose twice away from home, one, the game we're just talking about, where there were several circumstances where you could accept it, and the other one, they conceded a last-minute Billy Sharp goal at Sheffield United.
Who finished second.
They're the only 2 away defeats, so I certainly wasn't going to be too hard on them after the Preston game, but I think that was sweet for Alex Neil, though.
Yes, yeah, definitely. I think if I cast my mind back, I think there was a lot of noise on social media about that one, and a few nerves beginning to creep in.
But when isn't there on social media?
Well, true,
but we also what's being said on social media.
And the Buendia stat, because Buendia didn't play that game.
Yeah.
And when Buendia didn't play,
that's the first time it really got highlighted.
Norwich didn't win, didn't they? Yeah.
And we also saw something that was quite uncharacteristic of Daniel Farker, which was quite an angry response post-game to that.
Yeah, but I think maybe it did concentrate the minds. I don't know, but again, they'd been on such a good run before it. We talked about that crucial run they had, where they played Leeds and Ipswich and all of those matches where they were so impressive. This was the next game. It was the game after that run that we'd all been pinpointing. So as long as they bounce back quickly, I don't think anyone was going to have too much of a problem with it, and lo and behold, that's just what they did.
I think that's the major thing, isn't it? After you lose a game, in the Championship, we look for trends and we look for patterns. It's always about how teams respond to games that they've lost and how they do that, and Norwich did that in emphatic fashion, starting at Bolton, but they did stay in the Northwest. I think there was contract talks with Farker around that point that he sort of completely stopped, just to focus on this Bolton game, and if there was a game to sort of eliminate all of that self-doubt that perhaps there was creeping in slightly, it would have been a 4-0 away.
And there is one, even if you're an Ipswich fan, there's one goal in this game that's just, you're like, what is happening? Jesus, the Pookie goal was, I mean, you describe it, but I'm kind of watching, they just lost to Preston. They might, I don't think they're going to slip, and then, just brilliant football, brilliant goal, 4-0 away win.
And they missed a penalty as well.
Yeah, they missed a penalty.
Even in this one, so
Who missed that one?
That was Kenny McLean. That was the last one that they
It was his first start, wasn't it, Kenny McLean?
Yeah,
I was about to come on to that. I think there was a few injuries in midfield with that one. They were sort of debating who was going to come in there. I think there was a lot of talk Ben Godfrey was going to take that, but knowing Daniel Farker as we do now, that was probably never an option, was it? And we saw Kenny come in, and again, it seized his opportunity.
And I think you made a pertinent point a minute ago, actually, about Daniel Farker's contract talks, because when you sort of look at what people say about this season, and they always say, well, at the start of the season, Norwich fans weren't sure about Farker and some wanted him out. What I think you forget when you're talking about that is that actually Daniel Farke's future was always going to be a big subplot this season because he was entering the last year of a 2-year contract. So one of the reasons why there was question marks about his future going into this season was that actually this is the last season, and we all knew at some point during the season either he was going to have to make a decision or the club was going to have to make a decision. I think it's one of the reasons why there was talk about what they're going to do with Daniel Farke, because we knew it was coming to a head. Actually, they timed it just about right and managed to announce it here before kick-off in a midweek game and got a big lift from it. But I think that's one of the reasons why there was talk about Farke's future through a lot of the season, just because we didn't know until that contract was signed what was definitely going to happen.
Connor, can I quickly come in and just
ask? Of
we
course.
haven't spoken about central midfield, and this surprised me quite a lot because we get to this 8-game winning streak and the combination is Tribal and McLean, and we talked about how the team developed during the season, and I'm looking at it and Tetty and Leitner, and I'm thinking, no, that's good. That's a really solid, powerful, experienced player against a really talented deep line playmaker. And then Vrancic kind of comes into that a little bit, and you've basically got 5 good central midfield players there. I just wonder, from your two point of view, did you expect it to finish up being McLean and Tribal? And explain this central midfield dynamic to me, because any of the combinations seemed good, and I found it quite surprising.
I think from my perspective, there was a time where I was sat watching Norwich, and I was going, they cannot play without Alex Tetty.
Right.
If they don't have Alex Tetty, they look defensively all over the place. So for me, it's been a real surprise to not only see the amount of changes in midfield, mostly due to injury, they've been mostly enforced changes, but also how well those players have done when they've come in. I mean, Mario Vrancic 18 months ago was a player that we all sort of thought wasn't suited to the rigours of the Championship, and now we're looking at him and he's
£675,000.
and he's grabbing key moments and
have you seen his
points.
Stats as well?
Incredible, incredible.
Absolutely off the charts for key passes as well.
And in that spell in January, won the Player of the Month award for the entire division. So
and only started 14 of the 46 leagues.
And scores every time I watch Norwich.
And what Norwich's second joint top goal scorer by the end of the season.
Incredible, But that midfield, you're right. I think it was quite pleasing to have McLean and Tribal, or Tribal and McLean for that part of the season, because it's quite a satisfying double act name to say. You can imagine that as a detective duo on ITV on a Sunday night, can't you? Tribal and McLean.
But Leitner is a far better player than any of them, isn't he?
Yeah, he's good at what he does, and in terms of picking a pass, and certainly going way back to the Ipswich game and Norwich's upsurge then, it all came from when they stopped playing Leitner at number 10 and moved him back and gave him more space.
I thought, he's the man. Here's your deep line playmaker.
The beauty of it is they've got midfielders who complement each other. So Mo Leitner, as good as he is, cannot do what Tom Tribal and Alex Tetty do. But Mario Vrancic can't do what Alex Tetty does.
And the philosophy and the pattern of play is king. It doesn't matter who goes in there. This is the job. This is what you're doing.
But you need this in the Championship. It's 46 hard games.
God, 3 a week sometimes.
Yeah, you need square pegs for square holes. And if Tetty doesn't play, Tribal can come in. You need that. I mean, I know we talked about Leeds a lot, haven't we? But how often have they started games with, I think, Stuart Dallas playing at left back, or Shackleton, who's a midfielder,
They haven't had left back all season.
You cannot get through a whole season without that eventually catching up with you, and that's why Norwich, actually all of the midfielders we're talking about, they had various combinations during the season, but they all played a massive part. That they wouldn't be, if one of them hadn't been at the club, they probably wouldn't be where they were now.
You can take each individual out and say they've been really underrated and they haven't been spoken about a great deal.
You've got to be able to absorb injury, suspension, loss of form over a 46-game season. And Norwich, one of the things from losing James Maddison, probably on paper, the names in the starting 11 wasn't as good, but the squad was much deeper. They invested that so wisely and gave themselves options to cover everywhere on the pitch.
Absolutely. And after that Bolton game, we then go to games against Middlesbrough and Rotherham. And in the Championship, you always get told, and I know Norwich have broken a lot of these rules this year, but you get told you have to win ugly. And if you were going to look at 2 games and say they won those ugly, it would be those 2, I think.
We're talking about Rotherham and Borough here.
Yes. Those 2 run of games where it was almost like grinding out a result.
And it was headed goal from a corner. We had a joke in a WhatsApp group I'm in, and kind of started when Pookie scored against QPR of, oh, here comes the Norwich goal. Where one of my mates would text me at 0-0 in a Norwich game. And this Middlesbrough one was so when's the Norwich goal happening? Oh, here comes the Norwich goal. There you go. And they just churned it, and that was the 7th win, wasn't it? And you're setting yourself. Cardiff did this last year. It wasn't their run-in it was a period just before the run-in where they won 8 games in a row. And when people get nervous, as we've seen, and start doing really dumb performances in the run-in, if you've got that lead, and Norwich basically got promoted in that run of 8 games, didn't they?
Because what you forget is actually everyone drops points in the run-in.
Except the bottom, the 2 teams that surge out of the relegation zone tend to have the best points per game, and mid-table absolutely falls off a cliff, doesn't it?
I still think Onel Hernandez is disappointed that he hasn't won the Ben Bloom Hernandez of the Year award in the Championship.
I think every team needs a good Hernandez, don't they?
That's what I said actually when Norwich signed Onel Hernandez. I was trying to rack my brains and said there's been so many Hernandezes and Norwich haven't had one. Yeah, and Norwich haven't had one, so that was nice. I think we've had a Rodriguez, haven't we? And Hernandez was due. I think if I cast my mind back to that Rotherham game, they had a very good home sort of run this year, even though
horrible
they
to
got
play
relegated.
against as well.
Yeah,
horrible.
Unbelievable. And of course they've got the links with Paul Warren from a Norwich point of view, but that was a really tough game, wasn't it?
Yeah, and again they found a way of winning it. And I'd seen some strange things happen at Rotherham in the past, where we'd had Nelson Oliveira, Lewis Grabban sent off. We'd even had Lewis Grabban not even turn up for one game there, literally not turn up because he walked out the team hotel. So it's one of those places where when you follow the same team all the time, you get a little bit scarred, don't you? And you turn up to places thinking, oh, we never win here, or something always happens here. And yet they actually got through that one fairly comfortably in the end. I mean, when it got to 1-1, it was a little bit jittery, but it wasn't 1-1 for long. Ben Godfrey gets on the end of a corner, and off we go again. And from there, 2-1 up. They saw the game out really well. He had a wonderful chance, didn't he? They won it, and they should have won it more comfortably, probably.
And we go after that, and we're in this spell now where Norwich is starting to draw games, and the nerves are starting to creep in. What were your views at that point? Because I think within and around the club there was a lot of self-doubt, should we say, probably at that period.
I mean, I've talked over and again now about all the evidence that Norwich were just a very, very good team all season. So I never thought they would totally fall off a cliff. The Buendia thing comes back, doesn't it? Because he gets a red card and they draw all the games he was suspended for. Look, they got a dose of their own medicine with a very late goal against Reading. They weren't. I was at the Wigan game. They weren't that good against Wigan, and what we spoke about earlier, this tidal wave 7 forwards substitution got them out of it. Sheffield Wednesday, obviously, probably the best goal I saw all of last season.
Incredible.
Forestieri's goal, I cannot believe he hit it that hard. And you said something in one of the other parts about what's Farke doing, bringing on Tim Closer. If he hadn't, this rule of thumb of 30 minutes, 30 seconds extra stoppage time,
it's a very good
Vrancic wouldn't have been able to take the free kick.
You're probably right, yeah.
Would he? As lots of people decided to argue with me, that is not in the rules, 30 seconds. It's an informal rule of thumb. But no, I think what was happening underneath Norwich was the key there, in that Leeds were having a kitten, weren't they? And Sheffield United lost at home to Bristol City. All of a sudden it became a battle between those two for second and third. And Norwich were like, oh, okay, we'll be champions then.
Yeah. Like you say, I think everyone dropped points during that run-in, didn't they? And this is how you see football completely differently when it's your team compared to the rest of the country. All the championship programmes I was watching on TV, the podcasts I was listening to, were all concentrating on the battle between Sheffield United and Leeds for second place, because they were all saying, well, Norwich are up. And none of us here were having it. When you talk about doubt in the club, I think that was mainly from the fans.
Yeah,
I think most people here just wanted to get the job done as quickly as possible. But every Norwich supporter was worried about the fact that they were going to blow it.
Chris,
but actually they never really looked like it.
Those four draws, how many points did Norwich finish with? 94?
Yeah.
Should have got 100 points.
Well,
that is not a team that you should be worrying about. Do you know what I mean?
You do. When it's your team,
you're a football fan, aren't you?
I know, but you're looking at the numbers and you're like, it would be... I know Liverpool have just finished second with 97 points in a 38-game league, but it would be unprecedented for someone in the Championship to have the points Norwich had after that 8-game streak and not go up.
You're absolutely right, but if you're a football fan and your team is 2-0 up at Wembley in the playoff final with 10 minutes to go, and
are we going to lose this?
You're still thinking, one now, and it gets interesting. You can't bring yourself to say it, can you? Till it happens. It's totally illogical.
I think at that point most Norwich fans were looking at that 90-point mark, and it almost felt like Norwich was sort of crawling towards it, and that was the issue in terms of
Leeds
nerves.
kept losing,
Exactly.
which helped those nerves.
Which of course helped on Bank Holiday Monday. I mean, I was at the Stoke game, and the deflation among the away support, and noticeably the players as well, when that full-time whistle went, was something that I hadn't seen for Norwich since early August.
It really was, yeah. And I think the problem you had then was you had Good Friday, Well, we woke up in the morning thinking, results go our way, we could do it today, and it didn't happen. You then had Easter Monday, where I think everyone had got, right, this is the day. If results go away and we do our job, we're up. And again, it didn't happen. And you're right, there's one of the images of the season, really, is Norwich getting actually a decent 2-2 draw at Stoke, and the players laying on the pitch at the end of the game as if they'd just been beaten in the cup final. And it's ridiculous now when you consider that Norwich finished 11 points clear of third place. But at that moment, on that Bank Holiday Monday at Stoke, that's maybe that Easter weekend I mentioned, Closer being thrown on up front, and the reaction of the players at the end. That's the only time I really felt jitters from the players and the manager, and it was unnecessary in the end, but we didn't know it at the time.
Well, I think had Leeds have beaten Brentford that day, it would have been 3 points or something. The gap would have been cut to, and then I think nerves really could have set in. I think.
Yeah. Well, my memory of that day will always be not the game, and this. How often would you do this as a football fan? You never remember the football. You remember everything around the football, and it will be driving home, stopping at Crawley services after hearing Leeds had lost, and interviewing loads of Norwich fans, one of whom had a horse's head on mask, celebrating Leeds' defeat. And that's Bank Holiday Monday. That's how I will remember it. Never mind what happened at Stoke.
Yeah, and I mean, I was part of the away fans that did travel. I was on the coach on the way back. I remember how silent that journey was. Probably until Sergi Canos' second goal goes in for Brentford, and then it started to chirp into life. You were at that Leeds game.
I was at the game, yeah.
How I mean, we've spoken about Norwich's character throughout this. How was Leeds? Because it looked like that was when it all really began to set home. Probably for Bielsa and, as you say, Hernandez. I think there was images of him crying on the pitch. That felt like the moment that the carpet got sort of taken away from their feet.
In terms of the title, you can actually wind it back to the Good Friday. They lost at home to Wigan and had 31 shots or something, which was a very fun day for me because I started in Sheffield United, Nottingham, and then I saw you, didn't I, before the game?
Yes,
I was across here for Norwich and Sheffield Wednesday. At that point, the entire top three were all underperforming in terms of points per game, weren't they? I think Sheffield United just edged it in. I think they got 14 in the last 7 or something. But I understand the jitters, but I think it was ordained from the 8-game streak.
We all feel very silly now.
Yes. Right. And I think the nature of Norwich's squad and the way it was and how young it was, naturally the questions to Daniel Farke were going to be about inexperience and his squad's
but even Daniel Farke, after that amazing 2-2 draw against Sheffield Wednesday, he was quite cross afterwards with the refereeing performance, and he's not a manager who did that very often. He's usually, across the 2 seasons, he's been consistent. His approach, his mannerisms haven't changed very much. So you really notice.
I thought that was quite calculated, though.
Maybe
I thought he was trying to divert this. I heard that driving back from this one, and I thought, that's quite smart.
But
just push away from.
But he did it in a very Daniel Farke way.
But how did he not manage to? When Frančić puts that free kick in the top corner, Daniel Farke sits motionless in the.
I think.
How did he manage that?
Chris, the point then was the difference between 0 points and 1 point in that game wasn't actually that much of a big deal. It's the difference between 1 and 3 that would have made a difference at that point.
To us and to the fans, it felt like a massive deal, though. That goal.
No, absolutely. Well, you just know it's going to be your season.
You do. It's another one of those late specials,
96 minutes, 20 seconds into 5 minutes of stoppage time, your Frančić bombs one in the top corner again, doesn't he?
You mentioned that Sheffield Wednesday game and him bringing on Tim Close, him bringing on Tim Close, and how out of character that was for him. We've seen him after the Stoke game describe it as a naive performance. You spoke about the anger at Sheffield Wednesday. Do you think it was starting to set home on him how big of an achievement this was?
I think maybe it was, and maybe it was for the players, but they still weren't losing games. So even when we talk about the jitters, and maybe they weren't quite as, particularly that Wigan game, maybe it didn't look quite like the well-oiled machine we'd been used to over that 8-game spell. But they still didn't lose the games. They still found a way of getting a point at Wigan in a game where they didn't play particularly well. They've got a point against Sheffield Wednesday when they were 2-1 down with 96 minutes on the clock. So jitters, yes, but I think they handled them and they didn't crumble and they didn't lose like Leeds did in that running.
You've spoken about the midfield and we saw against Blackburn one of those midfielders take all the headlines in Mario Vrancic, who was absolutely superb actually for the back end of the season, but that game in particular stole the show with what was a stunning strike.
Yeah, and that was the promotion day.
It was, yeah.
That was the promotion day, wasn't it? Who started in centre midfield that day?
It would have been Vrancic and Tribal, I think.
So another different...
I don't think it was.
It might have been McLean, actually.
Vrancic and McLean.
Yeah, so another... I think everyone was just waiting for this thing to happen. It was just mathematically or, confirming the promotion. And I suppose for you guys, it's good that it happened. It happened up here and not at an away game. And And Vrancic is a very interesting one. You say only started 14 games, massive output. Will be interesting to see what happens with him next year.
I think fascinating. It'll be interesting to see what Norwich do all summer in terms of the transfer business. You would think that of those three midfield playmakers we've mentioned, McLean, Leitner and Vrancic, as we sit here now, they will probably all think they should be the one starting on the
That's no bad
day of the
position
season.
to be in,
it's
is
not,
it?
and they all probably did enough. That you could make an argument for any one of them and say, that's who I'm starting with next season. So that's probably one area that Norwich, if it was me, which thankfully it isn't, that's one area I wouldn't concentrate on in terms of transfers in the summer.
And those midfielders you mentioned are actually ones you look at and say they've got top flight experience in Germany. I mean, Vrancic had a season in the Bundesliga, Leitner obviously at Dortmund. So they're players that know what the top leagues are about, and they're going to be pivotal.
Absolutely fascinating to see. And of course, there's only 38 games next season, so anyone who's not in the team is going to play even less than they did this year.
Put yourself on holiday, Chris, eh?
And in terms of getting promoted at Carrow Road, as a Norwich fan, where does that rank for you? Because we've seen them get promoted at Fratton Park before. I think, what was it, Sunderland before previously. Not really done it at Carrow Road before, particularly never to the top flight. No, so that was a big moment for everyone inside.
I think it was. I think given that this season was all about the togetherness, and that word came up a lot, and the atmosphere improved a lot at Carrow Road during the season. A lot of hard work went into that. Helped, of course, by a winning team. That's always going to improve the atmosphere. But I think to do it here was fitting. I remember saying in the build in the run-in, it would be lovely if they could seal promotion here, because I've never seen them do it. I've been lucky enough to commentate on a few promotions, but they'd all been away or at Wembley, and Wembley was great, and we'll never forget Wembley. But doing it at Carrow Road, that's another little thing ticked off the bucket list. I'm so glad it happened here, and we were able to celebrate it long into the night. Absolutely,
and of course the debate that surrounded sort of the Blackburn game going into Aston Villa was how significant winning the league was. As a supporter, it feels like everyone wants it, but would it actually have taken the gleam off what was a really good season had they not have done it?
I don't think now it would have done. I think we still would have been really proud of what we'd achieved this season, but winning the league is just the cherry on the icing on the cake, isn't it? And actually having a lovely silver trophy to parade in front of the away fans and on the Monday around the city afterwards was wonderful and really did. It was deserved. They finished well clear in the end. So really well deserved. And I think my main takeaway from that Aston Villa game though was how pleased I was that Norwich weren't in the playoffs. I looked at what Villa were going through, and the fact they felt the need to rest Grealish and not play Tammy Abraham and still play really well.
McGinn was on 14 yellow cards, wasn't he?
He didn't play as well, and you sort of thought, if this was a playoff game and Villa were able to throw those three players in, you would think, I'm not so sure. So, it was a day where I was thanking my lucky football stars that we didn't have a playoff campaign ahead of us.
If we talk about buzzwords from Norwich season, we talk about togetherness, we talk about youth, we talk about enthusiasm, resilience also. How big a factor is their inability to know how to lose? Because every time it looked like you'd question and go, they're not going to jump this hurdle, they're not going to jump this hurdle, and then they would. That is so pivotal for any team that wants to go up and go up as champions.
I sound like a broken record, Connor. I think it all comes back to that well-oiled pattern of play. They're not a defensive team, but you just said they're very resilient, and they are, and they don't lose. And they don't not lose because they're very good defensively. They don't lose because they continually keep the ball and they continually create chances and score chances. I think it all comes back to some very, very good training ground work. And I had a few slightly narky Norwich fans when I did my team of the year, but what Norwich fans need to understand is that the pattern of play and the philosophy is, okay, look, Buendia's a star, we know that, and Pukki's been a star this season, but of much, much more value than any individual player has been that, and we just talked about being able to rotate in 5 different centre midfielders and the level of the team doesn't drop. So it's all of this work that's been done that I think leads into absolutely everything that's happened this season.
And for you, someone who closely follows the Championship as a whole, we speak, whenever you speak to pundits or whatever, they say, okay, you've got to spend quite a lot of money, you've got to have an experienced squad, you've got to have Championship experience, tends to be the word that's bandied about a lot. Norwich have actually proven that you don't need those things perhaps as much as the experts would say that you would.
Yeah, Sheffield United have proven it more in terms of money. Because they've obviously spent way, and that's the only issue for Norwich, is that Blades have come up with them having spent 75 million.
But they're two examples of teams who have put so much hard work into getting where they are.
And yeah, I agree with you. I'm really pleased about that because I don't want to see anyone go into liquidation trying to chase Neil Warnock and his 45 million quid next year. As I said, the recruitment's been brilliant. It proves you don't have to sign Britta Sombalonga for 15 million quid to get your goals. You can get this scruffy little Danish guy and he'll score 20, a Finnish guy, sorry, from a Danish club, and he'll score 27, 28 goals for you. So, all of that I agree with.
The dynamic of the Championship, particularly from a financial point of view, is really interesting because we're in a position now where there are two teams in the playoff final, Villa and Derby. If they go up and come straight back down, the likelihood is one of them is going to be in administration. That team, if that happens, if they go up and come straight back down, well, they're fighting financial fair play as well. There's so many teams who just chuck money at chasing the dream and lose their way.
That's something that Norwich have done well. I know people watching will think I've been a little bit labouring the point about the money that they haven't done it for nothing. Let me finish. There's something that they've done very, very well is they've managed the income dropping down very, very well. And Norwich needs to be given credit. Their commercial revenue is more than Aston Villa's. And Aston Villa is a bigger club than Norwich. What I would say about the Villa Derby thing is don't worry about the team that gets promoted and goes down. Worry about the one that doesn't go up. Because Derby have just sold their own ground to themselves to kill a £40 million shortfall. So they're going to be on the brink. And Villa were 2 hours from going into liquidation after Dr. Tony. I know you guys are overjoyed Norwich fans and you've done it. You've got the £100 million, but this is very, very worrying in the Championship.
Well, my point was going to be, as Norwich fans, we've seen that financial abyss that you can go into
in front of your face.
Norwich was so close to going into it as well, and had it not have been for James Maddison being plucked from relative obscurity, then their squad would have been obliterated this year.
Potentially,
and we would have seen a lot of players.
Or there would have been a 25 million quid gamble this season, wouldn't there?
Exactly, and that could have been really dangerous for the future of the club.
Yeah, which shows how well they've done this season and how important it's been to get it right and get it right quickly. I think it's fascinating, isn't it, the financial ramifications of Championship compared to Premier League. But one thing that I've always thought, and having seen Norwich in the past spend big money on players and then not deliver, and actually they've got a great history of some of Norwich's finest ever players have been bargain buys and players
they're
they've
almost
brought
better
up.
when they don't have any money, aren't
they? I think the great sort of thing about money is that you've got your top six in the Premier League and that's a different league altogether, but all the rest of the teams, just because you've got no money or you have got money, the players that are around are no better. The players don't get better. It's just if you go in for a player and the club they're currently playing for knows you've got Premier League money, they just charge you more money. You look at how much Ross McCormack has moved for over the years because clubs who've had parachute payments have gone in for him.
Absolutely.
Doesn't mean he would have made any difference to Norwich City this season. Money is not the be all and end all. I mean, it helps if you spend it correctly. And Norwich and Ipswich have both been through this over the last 15, 20 years, that they've got themselves in positions where they've been in the Premier League and they've had money. And they've wasted it and really, really paid the price for years afterwards.
And it's the crazy people who don't have parachute money. And this is where I will commend Norwich. It's the crazy people who don't have Championship money, like Mr. Chansiri, Dr. Tony, Mel Morris at Derby, who try and make up the gap. Can you imagine if Wolves hadn't gone up? But with they lost £1 million a week. It's I feel very strongly though that if the FFP limit is 13 million loss a year, and you're giving a team £45 million, that just doesn't add up to me. And you're going to get people who try and chase the difference and potentially gamble the future of their club.
I think it is such a shame because as a football supporter, you don't want to worry about your team's bank balance.
Absolutely not. But it's so important now.
It is. That's the thing. It's impossible now to be a football fan without having to have an eye on that and have to take that into consideration with every judgment you're making. Because all you want to do is turn up on a Saturday with your mates, watch your team, enjoy it, hope they win, and say what you would do in the transfer market in the pub or on social media afterwards. But there's a whole other layer now with football being the massive business, the massive industry that it is, the rules that are coming in, that as a football supporter you've got to be aware of, and you've got to know what's going on at your club and other clubs as well.
You don't have the whole picture.
You've mentioned a few owners there who have chucked money at it and have
without
chased the
parachute,
dream, and then have fallen short and find themselves in trouble. And that's where Norwich perhaps stand alone, because they've got two owners who throughout everything have been a constant, even in this sea of change have been a constant.
Yeah, and I think there's a concern about what happens when they're not the owners anymore. They're not getting any younger. We hope they stay here for many years to come, but at some point they won't be here anymore. And it would be good to know what succession plan is in place for after that. But what credit and what admiration you've got to have for Delia and Michael, who have rebuilt this club 3 times now. You talk about how many times Sir Alex Ferguson put together Manchester United teams. Well, you look at when Delia and Michael came in the mid-90s, and Norwich were, post Robert Chase, a mess on the verge of going into administration then, and they revolutionised things behind the scenes at Carrow Road, turned this into a 365 days a year viable business with things going on all the time. Eventually they got the reward, and Nigel Worthington took the team to the Premier League. When that went wrong, that they went all the way down to League One, the debts were back, and they had to start again and rebuild with David McNally and Alan Bowkett and Paul Lambert. Up they go to the Premier League again. That goes wrong, and 2 years ago we're looking at another financial black hole on the horizon, and they've rebuilt it again under Stuart Webber and Daniel Farkas. So
in the nick of time,
right?
But
it's amazing how many times they've done it, how many times they've had to totally rip up what's happening at the club and start again. And you do wonder, there's no telling, you wonder what the next 5-10 years are going to hold for Norwich City and for lots of other football clubs as well.
But we've got to remember there was a point, as you mentioned, that Brentford game. I remember quite vividly the chance that were against Delia on the board.
Yeah.
It could have been so different. Had Norwich have opted to sell a club to someone who wanted to chase that dream and then fall short, and then they'd be going through the same process that Sheffield Wednesday and
I think
Derby
sometimes you just have to accept who you are and what you are, and Norwich is a great club, and but they're not Man United, they're not Tottenham, and Norwich are now they're now in the elite. Any team that either has £100 million Premier League TV money or residual minimum 75 million parachute payments is in the elite, and Norwich fans have got to understand, as long as they stay in the elite, either in the Premier League or in the Championship with parachutes getting promoted, that's not a bad place to be, and it's a darn sight better than chasing it without that money and potentially busting yourself.
The other thing I would say though is that Delia Smith and Michael Wynne-Jones are the club owners, and when you're in that position, when things aren't going very well, actually you are allowed to criticise them. You can voice your displeasure. You can say, look, we should be doing better, and I think they accept that as well, and have quite forcibly argued with supporters and put their point of view across. I think at the time you're talking about, Daniel Farker was relatively new to the club, Stuart Webber was relatively new to the club. It felt unfair for the supporters to be laying it at the door of the manager or the sporting director. So where do you look? And the people running the club, of course, they do their best, as every football manager does. But there comes a time where you do have to ask them some difficult questions. And actually, they have delivered on it time and time again. But I don't think they would expect themselves to be completely immune to criticism. And no one in football is.
No, understood.
How do you view Delia's and Michael's sort of ownership of this football club comparing with sort of other Championship clubs? From an outsider's perspective, I just think it's interesting.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I remember the days under Chase where whenever Norwich got a good player, they were going to be sold. I remember Martin O'Neill slamming his papers down and storming out of board meetings. It's so difficult to say without mentioning the context of how the Premier League, the money has elevated in the last 10 years, and Norwich have been at the top table at the point where the money has gone through the roof. So they've been in the right place at the right time a couple of times. Obviously, from good practice to get up there. The proof's in the pudding. They're in the Premier League. There was a potentially ruinous potential even if they'd finished third this season and had a brilliant season, exceeded everything, lost in the playoffs. You wonder, okay, what happens next? Delia and Michael are not rich like
no, they're not.
Some owners,
and that's why the decisions they make on a day-to-day basis, and not so much them, but the people they put in charge of running the club, actually it's far more important than who owns it in Norwich's case, because under Delia and Michael, we've been a Premier League club for a number of years. We've also been a League One club under the same owners. So that shows that their influence probably day to day. It's about giving the people, handing over the right responsibilities to the right people. They don't have the sort of money that's going to totally revolutionise the club in a season.
And I know I've mentioned parachute payments, but even last season, the wages compared to the income, and I know it was bolstered by some good sales, they were still spending within their means. Yeah. So they've had that bonus, but they've done exceptionally well to ride this out, given that they let Alex Neil continue with a 55 million wage bill, get us up, and he didn't do it.
Yeah. And it's sort of the predicament West Brom find themselves in now with that big wage
And
budget.
it's frightening, isn't it? It's absolutely frightening. They've got another 2 years now, so they've got another 50 million odd to come in. But what do you do? Do you now start saying, and what about Middlesbrough? They've just sacked Tony Pulis this morning. Yeah. No more parachutes. FFP is being enforced now. You're going to get points deduction.
It's a horrible thing, isn't it, for teams like Norwich? It's happened to, and a number of other clubs as well. That you feel great when you've seen your team get promoted, but you can have a bruising season in the Premier League. Take a few hidings, come down, you don't feel quite so good about your team, suddenly things have got to be restructured, and you've got that awful dilemma with whether you throw everything at it to get back up in the first season, or do you then start downgrading the squad, downgrading the amount
and
of money
downgrading your expectations.
Well, that's it.
Yeah.
And then, but do you do that? You can do that, as Norwich have proven this season. You can spend less money on players than you have done in the past and be successful, but it's not easy.
I was going to say, we've seen Tony Mowbray, I think, reference to the Norwich model in terms of how he's looking to recruit at Blackburn this summer. We're going to see probably a lot more of the Norwich style approach to doing things in the Championship. Is that the way you see it going then? A team
Can I be really pedantic?
Of course.
This is the Huddersfield approach.
As Stuart Webber would say, I think that's a relatively lazy comparison.
It's literally the same bloke.
Well,
how is it different?
Well, it's in terms of the financial situation of the two clubs.
Well, he had 75 million more here than he did at Huddersfield.
Well, he had to strip back a lot more here than he did at Huddersfield, and there's a lot less expectation.
I'm half being pedantic. But no, it's.
Or okay, let's say the Webber model. Then,
I'm being very pedantic. I'm just saying that this was done by the same guy 2 seasons ago. Before.
But it's not a mirror image, I think is the point.
No, I'm not saying it's a mirror image, but yeah. Okay, let me put the question back to you. What is the Norwich model?
I think in terms of going for youth, which he did to an extent at Huddersfield and probably more so at Norwich. I think the fact he's recruited a lot more from abroad. I think Huddersfield were probably more reliant on loan signings than Norwich were to an extent. Okay, he did it with Colin Quaynard and Kachunga and players like that, but he's proved it, I think, on a different scale at Norwich. It just feels like Norwich have done Huddersfield twofold, if that makes sense. It sort of feels...
It's a bigger club.
Yeah, and he's had 2 years to really stamp. I feel like this is Stuart Webber's... If he could design a football club, I feel like it's Norwich right now, whereas Huddersfield, I'm not sure he had quite the freedom he does here.
Can you imagine if clubs decide that the Norwich model is going German and that it's as simple as that? Can you imagine the
Borussia Dortmund too? Can you devastated?
I'm going to go work in Germany because someone in England will hire me. Yeah.
Can you imagine the attendances at German 3rd and 4th division games next season? All the scouts from English clubs.
That's the thing. It's all very well looking at Norwich and saying I'm gonna copy it, but
you cannot do it.
It's taken elements of it, isn't it?
Yeah. One, you have to be as good at recruitment. 2, the plan has to work perfectly. Let's be honest, the players have done amazingly. And also, I can sit there as a detached observer and say, right, I'm going to split my centre-backs, push my full-backs forward, my deep-line players are going to service the front, and my forward's going to score 28 goals. But I'm sure every manager in the country asks his team to do that, but you have to have everything set up around it for it to work, don't you? And that's what they've done well.
Do you see the shift in recruitment changing? So those £10 million that we're seeing won't happen, and actually we'll see Buendia signings more often.
I really, really hope so, because and if that's what this Norwich season gives to the Championship, and we need to praise Sheffield United as well, because they've obviously had £75 million less and got up as well. And we'll have a look at the wage bills when the results come around, but certainly Norwich's was still 42 million last year. It'll be less this year, but if that's what this season, and we stop getting a 20-goal Championship striker is now worth 16 million or whatever, then I really hope we see more Buendias and Tribals and Supermans.
The fact is that none of this is straightforward, and I've been doing this job for long enough, and Delia and Michael have been here long enough to have lived through a time where we were turning up to AGMs talking about how we need to follow the Charlton model.
Wow!
And that when they were under Alan Kirbishley and punching above their weight in the Premier League, if you start trying to copy another team, and you haven't got
someone else will be coming along with a new model.
Exactly.
Exactly.
It's such a dangerous thing to talk about. Well, we're going to do what they've done.
I realise we've sort of accelerated through 4 parts, managing to not talk about Timu Pukki. So it sort of links into the finances a little bit. How good has he been for your money?
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Great, like I said, great finisher. I did see something in the Ipswich game where Norwich weren't playing well and he was driving and taking the ball well, obviously a different role. Brilliant finisher, brilliant presser. From what I have heard, he's bought into the new fitness things here and improved in that regard. My question to you guys would be, he's obviously a player who's reliant he's been in a brilliant team that's created lots of big chances for him next season. I just hope Norwich fans, if he's only got 5 goals by Christmas next season or whatever in the Premier League, I hope Norwich fans look at how many chances that was from, because the chances are going to be, you would think, you're going to have a lot less of the ball next season and he's going to have less chances. So I hope he's judged on the amount of chances he gets rather than the goals.
Well, I'm no tactical expert. I don't really know what I'm talking about when it comes to on a football pitch. But I did have a chat with Alex Neil after the Preston beat Norwich, because of course we know him very well from his time with Norwich, and he was talking a little bit about how impressed he was with Timu Puki's movement and how people find that so difficult to deal with. And to me, you've just got a player there who he's been a striker now for long enough to have totally learnt the trade, to be comfortable with his game and to know where he needs to be at certain times. And if it will work in the Championship, you would think it should work in the Premier League as well. But yes, the chances are going to be fewer and further between, so he's going to have to take them when they come his way.
Yeah, which he has done
so
all
far,
season.
So far, so good.
Yeah. Let's finish by speaking about the future then. Norwich City going into the Premier League next season, how do you think they'll get on? And obviously we're sitting here prior to any signings being made and departures. And
I don't know. Just don't do a Fulham.
Don't there's any chance.
Yeah,
of that.
don't. I don't think they need to spend a massive amount of money, and whatever they do spend needs to obviously be with a long-term view. Don't completely bust the wage structure. Yeah. And it is possible that Norwich can be relegated and be in a million times better place than they were 2 seasons ago. So look, I honestly think the best thing Norwich can do is pretty much nothing and take this team, do the same thing, and sometimes that's better than adding this, that and that. Remember, they only have to be better than 3 teams.
We've already seen Stuart Webber say he expects Norwich to spend the least amount of money. Is it going to be a case of continuity and trust in the players that got them there? I
think they've all earned an opportunity, haven't they? They've all earned a crack at it. Clearly they're going to need to strengthen slightly, they're going to need to improve the squad somewhere along the line, but I think the biggest test next season is going to be one that they perhaps didn't have so much this season. It's going to be how they come to terms with defeats and possibly losing runs as well, because Max Aarons has been brilliant this season. He's lost 3 out of 40 games as a professional.
Zimmerman's is even, and Buendia's is even more ridiculous,
exactly.
isn't it?
So there are going to be times when it's going to be tested next season. You would expect, and I hope I'm wrong, but you would expect Norwich will go through spells in the Premier League where they might go 5, 6, 7 games without a win, and it's how stoic they are through that. And one of the reasons that managers like Sam Allardyce and those sort are so often employed in the Premier League is because they can handle losing games. Their approach doesn't change. Sam Allardyce has never won the league. He's used to losing lots of games and yet dealing with it and still pushing on with what he wants to do and everyone buying into it. And just hope that players, fans, everyone alike remembers that next season. It may not be nice watching Norwich lose more regularly, but we're where we wanted to be. We're a Premier League team, and you've just got to try and enjoy it and embrace it.
I'm intrigued on your thoughts of perhaps the promoted side who's best suited to going up, and perhaps because you've spoken a lot about Sheffield United and how well they've done it, and I think everyone will admit the way they've done it has been spectacular under Wilder, with tactics that involves overlapping centre-backs, which is incredible. So where do you place Norwich? Obviously we don't know who's got the playoff.
You'd think Villa would be the best place given the infrastructure, wouldn't you, if they do go up. Can Sheffield United go into the Premier League and bomb their centre halves halfway? But again, like I say, with both Norwich and Sheffield United, what's the alternative? Do you know what I mean? I
They're
think
2 teams going into the Premier League with a very set style of how they play, which you don't always see.
Yeah, so you never know. And in the glory days of Ipswich, they spent 5 years winning, went up to the Premier League, changed nothing and finished 5th. And next season they changed everything and got relegated.
Yeah.
So I really don't know. There's not much in it. You would say Norwich have got it over Sheffield United in terms of quality of player, wouldn't you? I don't know. I think Sheffield United need to sign more players than Norwich do. We'll see. God knows.
Well, we spent all last summer not expecting what happened this season, so let's
not
worry.
Absolutely. You say that. I was then going to ask you for a prediction to finish on in terms of a place. Or should we just say, do you think Norwich will survive?
Yes.
Do you think Norwich will survive?
I predict Norwich will be an elite club for a minimum of 3 years.
So is that a yes?
Honestly, I don't really watch the Premier League. I've done 74 Championship games, so I can't say I hope so because Ipswich fans will kill me on social media. But the cream will always rise. They're good enough, they will.
Brilliant. Chris, Ben, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to have your company. We've got to the end of this 4-episode marathon. I hope you've enjoyed it. This has been the review. If you liked it, leave a like, subscribe, comment your thoughts on Norwich City's season, also how you think they'll get on next season, when they need to strengthen, etc. It'd be good to see your thoughts. But for now, that's all, and I'm sure we'll see you very, very soon.